Did you know that there are over 3.2 million podcasts in the world? It seems like everybody these days has a podcast. But did you also know that 90% of those podcasts fail to make it to 20 episodes? There are various reasons for these failures, but one reason is that people don't know what they're doing. Shocking, right? As it turns out, the same reason why people don't operate on themselves also applies to podcast success. You want to talk to someone who has had success launching and marketing podcasts. Somebody like Juliana Barbati. Juliana runs a podcast marketing and production agency, and their team takes care of everything for you, making this process a breeze. All their info is in the show notes. You can go to julianabarbati.com, tell them TGFB sent you, and get a discount when paying in Bitcoin. That's right, Juliana is a Bitcoiner. Her and her husband were actually Bitcoiners before they were Christians. And so it's been great for us to work with them. They basically came to us and said, hey, we'd love to help you guys, help TGFB grow. And so we'd love to kind of apply our services to you guys. So go ahead and support them. If you have a podcast you're working on or one that you'd like to start, go ahead and check them out. Now let's get to today's show. Adam Curry, welcome to the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast.
Well, brother, it is so good to see you. It's taken a little bit to coordinate it, but I'm really happy I'm here.
Yeah, it's a wild story, a pretty wild journey to even finding you is just a testament to the crazy world we live in. I'll give a shout out to Lyle Pratt, one of the other authors of Thank God for Bitcoin and the founder of the Vita.live app and website. I just was using his app where you can search for people, and if they have the app, you can just text them using Bitcoin, pay a few sats, whatever the rate that the person sets. And so I just remembered that I'd seen you on there and shot you a DM and paid, I think it was like 1,000 sats or no, 3,000 sats, I think is what it was.
Oh, wait, did I miss the payment somewhere? It came into one of my many wallets. Oh, crap. All right.
We got to figure out where it is, but hopefully you can still, add enough Bitcoin to it to be able to make it a useful UTXO to transfer somewhere else out.
It was one of those things, though. I saw this Vita. I'm like, it's pretty good idea because obviously anything that's an open door is a problem for spam. I know I signed up for it. It's a good idea. I'll sign up for that. We'll see what happens. And I completely forgot about it. And then I got an email telling me that you would use that system. Yeah.
And so, then I'm just listening to your interview with Marty Bent. And all of a sudden, I'm getting shouted out for DMing you on that. I was like, holy cow. Again, just the reality of what Bitcoin enables and the intersection of Bitcoin and podcasting, I'm sure is something that we're going to get into here in a little bit. But maybe, again, I know we probably have people who aren't familiar with, you or your work. So why don't you kind of give an introduction to people who might be in that situation?
Well, I've been in radio and TV all my life. I'll be 60 this year, which finally someone actually called me an elder the other day. I'm like, okay, there it is. I finally hit. It hit me harder than I expected. I started in radio when I was 15, actually building transmitters and using them. And I've really been a radio nerd most of my life. And then through a number of weird circumstances, I all of a sudden found myself hosting a music television show in the Netherlands in the 1984. And then in 1987, MTV called me really out of the blue and said, hey, you want to come and work for us? I said, in New York? I said, yeah, New York. So went to New York. I wound up working there for 7 years for people born around 1995. This is when we had music videos. So you probably missed me. Actually, I left MTV to start an internet company in 94. Took that public in 96, a little before the big .com explosion. So didn't make billions of dollars, but built a really fun company with 700 people. We built websites we built Budweiser.com, PlanetReebok.com. We built a lot of the early big websites, did the first cybercast of the Grammys in 1996, and just a lot of different stuff, and grew that to be a pretty big company. And then we merged with another company, and I left in the end of 99, went back to the Netherlands. And flush with cash, I was flying helicopters, burning money in the air, doing all kinds of buying castles, cool stuff. Spent all of that money. That was great. I have no regrets. And was sitting there one day, and now 20 years later, ever since I became a Jesus freak, I understand that I didn't come up with podcasting, but it was truly given to me. And it was a perfect combination of my love for radio, my understanding of broadcasting, my involvement with the internet, started to cobble some stuff together. And we didn't have a name. It wasn't podcasting in the beginning. Started a podcast called The Daily Source Code, I think arguably the first episodic podcast ever, which was truly only intended to have a feed that the developers, who are all open source developers, had kind of congregated around this project. We didn't have GitHub, we didn't have Gmail, we didn't have all this stuff. We had email and I think Google Forms maybe. And so, I would literally talk about them doing the development work, and that caught storm. And interestingly enough, the first people who really understood what I was doing was what I call the Godcasters. These are, guys who were buying airtime on satellites and cable TV. They're like, oh, wait a minute, this is a great idea. And then public radio, WGBH, Tony Khan in Boston, he got it right away. He also said, this brings civility to the airwaves. And I always loved that he saw that. The BBC, so I started getting interviewed, and then it just, snowballed. And then in 2006, I think, Steve Jobs called me and he said, hey, do you have time for a chat? I'm like, let me check my calendar, Steve. And time for Mr. Jobs. And I had a really wonderful hour-long one-on-one with him, and he understood exactly what the iPod was to me. He said, Adam, I want to build radios for you, because that's literally what the iPod was. Wow. And this is before the iPhone. And so he got it. And he didn't need anything from me. He just wanted my blessing. He didn't need to ask for permission or anything.
Yeah.
And that, of course, blew up podcasting with, and it just became a huge thing until a couple of years later. Actually, Twitter was about to launch. They were a podcast company before they were Twitter. They were called Odeo. And we were actually all like, oh, what are these guys doing? Because they had a Flash interface and it would be creating and listening at the same time. I think they launched for 2 weeks. They closed it down. They pivoted and they opened up Twitter as microblogging, which is literally the same technology as podcasting with RSS feeds. Which, of course, works very poorly for a social network. That's why the fail whale was there all the time. So they re-architected to something other, because, RSS works great decentralized. That's what it's really good for. I went through the typical trappings of thinking that a podcast network would be the way to go. Actually, Steve had introduced me. Notice how I said that, Steve? Steve had introduced me to Kleiner Perkins. Yeah, my good friend, Steve. Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia Capital. So we raised money, started the network. I mean, that's when I figured out you can't monetize the network. It's just, this is not how it works. It's really an individualistic, decentralized medium. And I've been doing a podcast with John C. Dvorak called No Agenda for a couple of years at that point. We're now in our 16th year. Wow. We developed the value for value concept, which is really no more than, hey, we're giving this to you open, free, no hurdles, no paywalls, no levels, no commercials, no creepy corporate money. Whatever it's worth to you, send that back to us. And when you ask people in that manner, $5 is a lot for some people, $500 is nothing for another. You can't determine what someone else values a product at. And that's been great for us. So 2 families have survived. We have production costs very low. We do everything ourselves. Or, since it's not just money, but time, talent, or treasures, how we like to say.
Hey, let's go.
Later on, I said, hey, that's kind of a biblical thing. Who knew? So people run servers for us, run all kinds of We've never built a website ourselves. It's they help us with boots on the ground reports because everyone's an expert in something. And that's just been a postmodern media format that I don't think many have been able to rival. And it's very unique to us, I think. Just who we are as people and our relationship, because we really only talk on the air. We don't talk out or even email. We have nothing to say to each other. So it's all really, it's a performance, and it's twice a week on Thursdays and Sundays, and it's been my life. It's been the longest job I've ever had.
Yeah,
I really love it. And then 3 years ago, just to wind up the short career portion, which is involved with my faith journey. Apple, in concert with Facebook and Google and Amazon, and I think Spotify was around, they decided to deplatform some podcasts. And Alex Jones, but X22 report, some stuff that is really not that important. It's not killing anybody, it's not hurting anybody. And all of the independent apps were using Apple's database, and they've been good stewards of podcasting. But if they're going to change stuff, then that presented a problem. So I called up my buddy, Dave Jones, who lives in Alabama. He's a sysadmin for a small accounting firm. And we'd known each other for 10 years, really only met once. But, I'd say, hey, I got a cool idea for a product. And Dave would go, okay, let's build it. And, and 3 people would use it. And 2 of them was us. And we really liked it. And I said, hey, I have a new idea. Let's build our own index. And let's make an API available for free. under value for podcast app developers to create new stuff. And of course, Dave went, okay. And we started that value for value. Now we have 65 apps and services using it. There's 20,000 value for value enabled feeds. There's 25 new features. I mean, and Apple actually just, God bless them, just implemented one of our features from our namespace, which is the transcript feature. And they respected our functioning of that, and the existing transcripts that are out there flow through into the Apple app. So we consider that to be a huge validation of the work. And here I am. And that's everything in a nutshell.
I mean, that is just incredible. I mean, it's even just for me personally to think about how my life has been shaped by podcasts. I mean, I've been listening to podcasts for a very long time. I jokingly had this, well, seriously, but jokingly had this down here of who gets the title of the Podfather, because there's Bill Simmons gets referred to as the Podfather all the time. But I mean, based on this story, like, you are the official Podfather.
Well, but, I don't walk around with it on my chest. People call me the Podfather, and I take that with honor and gratitude.
Yeah. So we'll give him sports Podfather maybe, but the official title belongs to you. So I could jump off on like 84 points on anything you just said. But the question would be, how did you end up in the Netherlands? I mean, you grew up in Virginia. My mom's side of the family is from Virginia, so we've got Virginia connections. How did you end up going from Virginia to the Netherlands in your youth?
We were in Maryland, actually. My parents worked for government, and we were in Uganda, actually, when I was 2 or 3 years old for a couple of years. Okay. And then we came back, lived in Kensington, and then they got sent over to the Netherlands in 72. And I was 7 years old at the time. It was supposed to be for a couple of years, and then my parents decided they wanted to stay. So we were going to the international, me and my 2 sisters were going to the international school, and my parents decided they wanted to stay, which meant all the payment for the schooling would go away. And so literally we had a week of vacation from school, and my parents sat us down Sunday night, and they said, guess what you're doing tomorrow? What? You're going to Dutch school. What? And I spoke 5 words of Dutch, so I entered Dutch school in 5th grade, which of course at the time was traumatic, but in hindsight, what a fantastic opportunity to grow up, speaking multiple languages, to have exposure to Europe, but also having my American roots and understanding the differences in life and systems. And so I'm very, very pleased that is the path that I was taken on.
Yeah, the similarities between our 2 stories. So I didn't personally grow up overseas, but my wife and I were missionaries and helped plant a church in Uruguay in South America. And so our kids grew up in very much that same situation. And so, they started going to school. My son, when he was 3 years old, just started going, walked right into the classroom. Nobody else spoke English. And so he'll learn Spanish right alongside, at the same time he's learning English and stuff. And again, just all of those the blessings and the privileges of growing up in a different place and getting to see different culture and see the world through different eyes. I'm hoping that it affects my kids the same way it seems like it's affected you.
It has to. There's no two way. It has to. Absolutely. Yeah. That really is wonderful. I mean, I feel very privileged, and your kids probably are in that way too.
Yeah. And again, we moved back to the States a couple of years ago. And so that's been the more difficult transition, has been coming back to the States, because it's not been someplace that's been home for them. So let me ask you, how did you and John C. Dvorak, how did you guys meet, and how did the idea come about to start the podcast?
We were both on This Week in Tech on an episode. I think I was remote. I don't know if he was in the studio or not. I think it was audio. I didn't know if there was video at the time. So this was 2007, maybe, something like that. And after the show, we're all kind of chatting, and Dvorak says, so Curry, what's your deal? Are you rich? People don't like you. I'm like, why don't we have lunch, John? I'm going to be in San Francisco in 2 weeks. So we went out to lunch, and we really enjoyed each other's company. And I was going back and forth between London and San Francisco, and I actually hired him for my company in San Francisco. Yeah. And I'd go back, and then we'd jump on Skype once a week, and we'd literally talk. This is around, it was an interesting time in Europe. The Lisbon Treaty had been voted down, and then Ireland was told they voted wrong, so they voted again. And the euro was being introduced, and all these things were happening. And so I would tell him what I was reading in the news over there, and he would say, oh, it's interesting because here's how it's interpreted over here. So we're kind of deconstructing the media naturally, just as what we did. And we're doing it on Skype. And then at one point, John said, well, why don't we record this? We'll make it into a podcast. And okay, that's actually a good idea. What a waste of good chat. And we have, let's call it no agenda, because we have no agenda. We don't care. We don't want to do ads, literally no commercials, no jingles, we said, no nonsense. Of course, now then it was 25 minutes. Now it's 3.5 hours, jingles, all kinds, no sponsors, no creepy corporate money, but also we built a whole a system around the whole time, talent, treasure to support the project. We really learned a lot, and I haven't seen him in person in 6 years, I don't think. And when we get together, it's like a really awkward first date. We have nothing to say. Like, hey man, how you doing? Like, weird.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's very odd, but it's a great on-air relationship.
Yeah. So where did the interest in radio initially come from? Like, was your dad into that, or is it something you saw just by virtue of television or something? How did that become something that interested you?
When I was 5 or 6, my grandmother gave me a little transistor radio, a Sony solid state in a handsome leatherette carrying case, which had a 9-volt battery, AM only. And I would listen to it under my pillow at night. I'm not a sports ball guy, but I would listen to basketball games. Okay. And I loved hearing the squeaking of the shoes on the court. I loved the guys, the sportscasters explaining what was happening. The theater of the mind. I was really taken with that. And so I actually swapped. I'd saved up my money. Maybe it was like $5 or something. I bought a little reel-to-reel tape recorder off of a guy in the neighborhood, Mark Redmer, who used to sit on my head. He called it the sitting game. Long story.
Shout out to Mark Redmer.
Shout out to Mark. Shout out to Mark. Thanks, brother. But it was a little reel-to-reel. It was made of plastic and had, I think, D-size batteries in it, and so it often would break and wouldn't work. But I remember recording myself and like, oh my God, I sound like a girl. This is horrible. Like, how is this possible? So then when we moved to the Netherlands, I think, I'm not quite sure exactly, but for Christmas one year, my parents gave me a Radio Shack 100 projects in one, which is this breadboard, and it has all these components on it: resistors, capacitors, some transistors, little knobs and dials, battery pack, and you connect it with different color-coded wires so that you could build the schematic. And it's a big book. I still have it, the big book. And in the back, like Project 97 is build your own FM radio transmitter. And so I built it and it worked. I'm like, oh, this is cool. And so I could receive it on the transistor FM radio in another room. And then I learned quickly about antennas and wavelengths. So I got way into that stuff. And then I built a bigger one and put an antenna on the roof. And my mom, God bless her, would drive me around the neighborhood, see how far the signal reached. And I just have a record player and put a record on. And I got back to the house and there's some kids going like, yeah, man, we heard your signal. This is really cool. So then I got another record player. I built my own mixer. I practiced for months in my room trying to get the voice, trying not to sound like a girl. And from there, actually, when I was 15, there was an ad in the paper for a local hospital radio station, closed circuit station in the local hospital. And you had to be 16. My parents said, go ahead, just tell them you're 16. We'll vouch. Yeah. And so I auditioned for engineer and host. I did not get accepted as host, but as engineer. And they had a really professional studio. I mean, it was the real deal with glass, double pane glass and big mixer. And so, of course, I would help do a couple of shows during the week or in the evenings, but I had the keys so I could go in on off hours and I could just go to town. And so I really practiced. And there I met a guy named Jeroen van Inkel. He also started with the hospital radio, but he was now playing in clubs. He was spinning records, but there was also this pirate station in Amsterdam called Radio Decibel. And this was like, they were up in an attic room and they had these huge surplus military transmitters and they were broadcasting every weekend all over Amsterdam, playing import records from like Chicago Warehouse and stuff. And he said, oh, you should go talk to him. Maybe you can get a gig. And so I went there and then they're like, why don't you do it in English? It would be cool to have an English guy. And so I started, and because it was pirate, so I had to have an alias. I called myself John Holden. Yeah. And I just started doing the show, and it wound up every Saturday night from, I think, 11 to 1, I would do a show. And it was so weird because I was 17. People thought I was 24 and black. And so they would call in and I'd be like, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I ride a Harley too. I just made this whole persona.
Did that kind of shatter it? They're like, black guys don't ride Harleys. Like, what?
I would also, I'll meet you behind the American Hotel. There's no behind the American Hotel. It's a canal, So it was a great time. And from there, very collegiate family, you got to go to college, university. So I chose Salem College in West Virginia because they were one of the few colleges that would let freshmen on the air. at the college radio station. So I was running the station within a month. And then I was looking around like everyone's smoking weed and drinking. I'm like, I'm from Amsterdam. This is boring. I got to do something else. So I dropped out. That was very hard for the family. And, they really resisted. And I got an ultimatum, which was come home within 1 month, you're either back in school, you got a job and you're paying rent, or you're out. And I just started sending out tapes and letters and got to a guy who actually, you have to know the Dutch broadcast system is government owned, but there were these pirate guys from the North Sea from the 70s who were on the ships in the North Sea. They became so popular that they were actually legal, and they had one full day on the big top 40 station because it was all divided airtime. Yeah. And they also had some TV airtime. They really didn't know what to do with it because they were radio guys, and they had this idea for a music show. So the guy got my tape and he calls me in and he says, you're going to be live on TV this Sunday. And there were only 2 stations, so that, half the country would watch this. And I was kind of like thrown in, but at the time the Netherlands was the gateway to Europe also for music. So everyone in the 80s and early 90s, they all came through. Tina Turner, The Stone, David Bowie. I mean, you can't name it, or they haven't been through. I haven't interviewed them, talked to them. And from there, that's when MTV saw me and eventually asked me to come and work. So that's kind of how that history started from. And so, of course, when I saw the iPod, I went, that's a radio. That's the little radio my grandmother gave me.
Yeah, I just remember, I had one of those early iPods, and I just remember seeing the podcast thing, the ability to listen to it. And again, I had no concept of what a podcast was at that time. But again, just the technology and putting it in such a packaged form, like in such a small form, I just think, again, brilliant. I love the fact that Apple's still recognizing your work, and I wonder how much of that, their willingness to, incorporate what you're doing. Like, do you think it has anything to do with the past history you have with them, or is it just a, function of, they think they like the idea, it's all business?
Well, podcasting, of course, doesn't really deliver any business to Apple. Sure. They don't charge for it. They have started some lines of business with subscriptions, et cetera, but that's really peanuts. It's
exactly
less than a rounding error for Apple. The people who, of course, they want to, it's still one of the most used devices for podcasts. Sure. We know a lot of people who work there, and they're very friendly. They're way involved. They're in our community too. They're in our discussions. They know what's going on. Yeah. Apple is a huge machine, to get something done, to get something changed, particularly if it's not a revenue line, that's tough. So we love them. We're surpassing them, and they know it, and that's okay. Yeah. But then for them to say, oh, we're going to start taking some of those features and passing them through, that was great. That was a real God moment, actually, I think.
This is hilarious, applying this quote to Apple. But have you heard the imitation is the sincerest form of flattery? Have you heard the full quote of that?
No, what's the full quote?
Okay, so it's from Oscar Wilde, and the full quote, I believe, is something along the lines of, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that the mediocre can pay the excellent, or something like that. So,
I'll have to look it up now.
But yeah, and again, in this case, it works out. Again, Apple acknowledging, where they have room to grow and learn from other people is, good on them. That's a rare thing to find. Definitely. So I would love to ask you, so I know, you have probably the most famous interview you've done was Joe Rogan, I would think, or your interviews with him are probably the ones that, at least in the last few years, have been the most widely seen. And again, when you started talking about becoming a Christian, those episodes then get shared across, the Christian social media channels. So they have a gazillion views everywhere. But let me just ask you, so I know he is looked at as a podcasting pioneer. He had one of the earlier shows that started to get a lot of traction. What's been kind of your relationship with him? Was did you guys have an early relationship as you were building out your podcast as well, or was it something later in the last few years?
He reached out literally March of 2020, like 2 weeks before the lockdowns. And he said, hey, actually his booker called, can you come on the show? And so I had just started the Podcasting 2.0 project. And I'm like, well, this is really interesting because no one really knew me anymore. Podcasting had been 17, 18 years, MTV. Anyone who's hanging out today as a young person never saw me on MTV. Yeah. And so I went out to Los Angeles, and the first thing Joe did was said, you're the Podfather. So he recertified me right there. I'm like, oh man. So he recertified me as the Podfather. And I remember I got back home, and the next day he called me up. He said, man, I really appreciate it. That was really great. We would talk back and forth because I didn't know this at the time, but he said, this cancel culture is a problem. And, I had 2 more sponsors cancel on me. And So he didn't tell me, but he was already kind of in negotiations with Spotify.
Yeah.
So, we did talk a bit about, what the options were. And so then he went to Spotify, and then he called me again. He said, hey, I'm thinking of this. He said, California's horrible. I want to move to Texas. I want to go to Houston or Dallas. I said, no, man, you should come to Austin.
Yeah.
This is more for you.
Yeah.
So he did. And literally like 2 months after he moved to Austin, we moved out to Fredericksburg in the hill country, about an hour and a half west. So I feel like I abandoned him.
You drove him off, or he drove you up.
And then we did a couple more shows. And then on the last one, which is about a year ago, and we text maybe once a month or something, and Father's Day, Christmas, stuff like that. Cool. So I became a follower of Jesus. I was baptized last April. And the way I explained this to Joe is the truth, is that in this podcasting 2.0 adventure, all of a sudden I look up, I'm like, Christian. What's wrong with me? What's going on with this Christianity stuff? Now, I'm a conspiracy therapist, so I like looking at everything, 9/11, JFK, COVID, you name it, all this stuff. And so I'm like, well, why don't I start reading about it? Because turns out there's a lot written about Jesus. Who knew? Yeah. And so I started, reading Beautiful Outlaw by John Eldridge. There was another guy, Texas Slim, who had started the Beef Initiative, which is really important. We need to protect our American rancher and get to know him. And he's from the Panhandle, and he would usually come through 290 past us on his way to Austin, and then he'd stay overnight. And we'd be out on the porch at night, and I said, hey man, I'm really interested in Jesus, and I'm looking at this. I said, oh, dude, Jesus was a badass outlaw. Let me tell you about Jesus. And he would just throw this stuff in. And so there were just a lot of people around me, and no one ever pushed anything on me. But when I asked, they were ready to answer. And that was really cool. And so I read Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Sure. So I'm just reading, of course, then people saying all kinds of stuff. Yeah. And through a number of interesting circumstances, we wind up finding a church out here. Yeah. Which involves the Lord literally stopping us from going on vacation, leaving me with a Sunday free to go to church. Wow. Which, I work on Sundays. Now I get up early to prep to go to church, but, it was really not a thing for me. Yeah. And so this Bridge Church out here, which is a non-denominational, but, you got your worship team, you got a rock and roll pastor who also plays guitar in the worship team. Pastor
Jimmy Pruitt, right?
Pruitt, yep. And his wife, who's also a pastor, Annette. Mm-hmm. So we're checking it out, and I'm starting, at first it's a little hard for me, the worship music, because I said, there's no solos. I'm looking for solos in this stuff. It's not there. Anyway, so we finally invite them to our house for dinner. So now we've become a little acquainted. I want to really meet them. And so they sit down, and then I say to Pastor Jimmy, Pastor Jimmy, I really love your show. And he cracks up. He said, you're so right. You're so right. We do the same thing. He said, we got a show. I said, yeah, you got music, you got a format, you got all this. Yeah. And so he's obviously helped me a lot with our faith journey, because it's not common that a husband and wife are on at the same time. Yeah. So anyway, so all this stuff happens, and I'm just reading, and like within 2 weeks, I'm like, that's it. There's more evidence about Jesus and God being real, and this whole deal being real than any other conspiracy theory I believe in. I don't think we landed on the moon, and there's more evidence that Jesus was real, believe me. And the Holy Spirit is real, and it's all here. Yeah. And then Joe invites me back on again. Yeah. And I had to say it. I mean, there was just it had to come out. And that was not even I knew it the night before. Like, I got to tell Joe about this. Yeah. Yeah. And, it was interesting because there was zero negativity. There were maybe 5 comments that were like, and they were from Christians. You did it wrong.
Exactly. Gosh, man. It's
and of course, in hindsight, there's a lot of things that I didn't get quote unquote right, but and I'm still learning every single day, every day.
100%.
And I like to think that I just saw Joe the other day talking to Aaron Rodgers, and he said, "Jesus better come quickly." I'm like, who's going to tell Joe? Yeah. Someone's so.
Yeah, no, I just had thought it was a longer relationship, but that's fascinating. It's only been the last few years. It is interesting. I mean, Joe, he just had Dr. Stephen Meyer on like a couple of months ago.
Oh, yeah, the evolutionary scientist. Well, you can go back as far as you want. Yeah. You can call it the creator of the multiverse or the Wizard of Oz, but somewhere Someone created it, Joe.
Yeah.
You can say, well, it was more outer space than that, but it was still someone who created it. No, Meyer's great. He's a great guy.
He is. And like you just end up, like he says, you're just pushing the problem back. It doesn't actually deal with it. But I do want to talk about conspiracy theories because when I think about the resurrection, you talk about conspiracy theories, like it's literally been called a conspiracy theory since the beginning. Like it literally, the religious leaders and the Romans, like they basically conspired together to basically call this thing, the resurrection, a conspiracy. So, we're going to say that his disciples took the body and all these things. Like
they pay off the soldiers to say that they stole the body, the disciples stole the body in the middle of the night. Yeah,
absolutely. And so again, that's literally, so you can credibly say and realistically say that Christianity is founded upon the OG conspiracy theory.
Good point. Yeah, good point.
But we live in a world with all kinds of conspiracy theories. And again, in one way, there's a number of, I guess, senses in which I'm grateful for what happened in 2020. Because again, 2020 until now, there's so many things that were tried to pass off as being real and as being true. And if you doubted it, you were, a conspiracy theorist and you were insane or you were a Trump supporter or whatever you were. And I just think, again, that what we've seen in the last 4 years has just done nothing but just validate, when I think about myself and my belief in Jesus, like it's done nothing but validate. Like this is what happened in the last 4 years is exactly the type of thing that the New Testament describes happening with Jesus. You have government officials who, because of the different motivations, either whether it's power or, trying to maintain power or trying to maintain control around, the people and save their own power, they end up saying and doing things that are demonstrably lies. And demonstrably, proven demonstrably false with, the passing of time. And so how did you come to be interested in conspiracy theories? And then again, I guess you have kind of talked about looking at the gospel and coming to be convinced of it, which sounds insane to a lot of people. But where did your interest in conspiracy theories first originate?
I've been a pilot for a long time. Started in helicopters. I told you I bought a helicopter. I actually started a helicopter company, burned money in the air, and then later converted to fixed wing. So I've always been someone who likes flying, but really to get from A to B, not just to fly around. So 9/11, of course, was a traumatic occasion. And I was living in Amsterdam at the time. Yeah. And I can't remember how long after 9/11 it was, but I joined pilots for 9/11 Truth. And there's just so much that doesn't make sense from the aeronautics, from actual physics and stuff, that really got me on that path. And then this was kind of the same time, I started, even with as I said earlier, the Lisbon Treaty, that I was looking at this stuff, and what they were telling the Europeans was, you can have the same money, it's going to be great. You won't need a passport, it's going to be great. But if you look in the treaty and the protocols, there's all kinds of stuff in there. Interestingly, if you run away from police force and they shoot you in the back, that will be legal. If you have a communicable disease, they have the right at all times to lock you up. All this kind of stuff was in there. And I was just reading this because we had the internet, you could download it and look at it and read it. And I'm like, this is not true. Then there's this book called Legacy of Ashes. And it's written by Timothy Weiner. He's or Weiner. I'm not sure if it's Weiner or Weiner. He's former New York Times journalist. And it's about the CIA. My uncle, Donald Gregg, who's still with us, God bless him, 95. He was very high up in the CIA. He was a national security advisor to Bush Sr. when he was VP. And
no relation, by the way. I just want to point that out. No relation. Jordan Bush, I'm not related.
It's funny. Then Iran-Contra, he didn't really protect his boss's butt, so he wound up, he was exonerated from everything, but he did wind up as ambassador to Korea, go live somewhere else for a while. So there was stuff in this book, this CIA book, and I'm like, wow, and his name's in it a lot. So I call him up, say, Uncle Don, is this true? He says, yeah, that's pretty much how I remember it.
Oh my gosh.
Weird thing, even down to like small things like an enemy camp in Vietnam, or was it Korea, I think, during the Korean War. They'd put fluoride into the water to make everyone docile so they could take over the camp at night. So then I connect this to crazy people who don't like fluoride in the water. Now I'm firing on all cylinders.
Oh, wow.
Alex Jones, I get him on the internet. I'm like, InfoWars. I'm like, wow, I'm really jealous of that name to this day. Like, that's really what it is. It's information wars. That's what the war is. It's the war. Yep. There's a war on for your mind. Then Rand Paul comes on the scene. He's talking about the Federal Reserve. And like, what? This is not a government thing. So I had this whole awakening from multiple avenues. I'm like, whoa, the world is not what we thought it was. And there's a lot going on here. So that was really the start. And I just dove into everything hardcore. The big ones like moon landing and stuff like that. I mean, I'm a firmament first guy, so I don't think we're beyond it, but that's fine. The trick is not to get all emotional about it or, it's like, that's why I call myself a conspiracy therapist. People usually, it softens them up, like, oh, that's funny. But these are my beliefs for now. I'm always willing for them to be changed. So for me, and I didn't even come to the OG conspiracy of the stealing of the body. I read that much later, like, oh, there it is right there. And it actually says this has often been used throughout the ages. Like it says it right there in scripture, like, oh, holy moly. But then I found the power of prayer. And that was what really sealed the deal. It's like, wow, look what prayer can do. And I think I've always believed in some kind of higher power. I mean, I didn't grow up religious. Most of my related family is. My grandmother, whenever they had a kind of like a family compound where the 4 siblings grew up, and my dad and his brother and 2 sisters in Armonk, New York. And whenever we were there for Thanksgivings or whatever gatherings, when it was time to go, the oldest grandchild would have to read Psalm 121 from her King James, not New King James, from a King James version. I lift up mine eyes into the hills from whence cometh my help. It was like yay in there. And everyone, it was like, oh, I hope I don't say ye. It was like really, but my parents, they tried Unitarianism, and they found a group of American Unitarians in Holland. And then all I remember from that period is we got up at 3 a.m. We drove for a couple hours to find a hill, which in Holland is not easy. We found a hill. We're all up on the hill, watching the sun come up, and then they play Morning Has Broken by Cat Stevens, which ruined Cat Stevens for me forever. I cannot hear that song. It's very triggering. Like, what is this? What are we doing? Morning has broken. Like, no. So that did not sit well with me at all. But it was really the dudes around me, it was the men around me who clearly showed this vulnerability towards Christ and their faith and their willingness to share with me. And they said, this is a pretty good deal. And then all these people come out of the woodwork. What? You two? You? What? I get a call from Rudy Sarzo. I met him when he was bassist for Whitesnake. He's played with Ozzy, Dio. He's still on the road. And he's like, hey, bro, I hear you've been saved. And like, I read from the Bible every day. And just all these wonderful people. And I've never had this many friends. I've never had a community around church, male friends, which I've always kind of grown up around women. And I love, like, before we started this, you prayed for us. I mean, this is really touching stuff. I really, really love that. And I hope everybody can enjoy it this way. Of course, our world eschews this type of behavior. Oh my God, they must be in a cult. They must be crazy. Dude, I'm at the worship service now with my hands up. I can't believe it. Look at me. I must be hypnotized. I'm one of those guys with the wingspan. It's like,
it's so funny. The TGFB podcast is brought to you by the TGFB 24 conference. Thank God for Bitcoin 2024 is happening July 24th and 25th in Nashville. This conference brings together some of the best minds in the church, the academy, and in Bitcoin to explore the biblical foundations and daily consequences of how money affects the incentives and outcomes of the world we live in. The name of the conference this year is Render to God, Stewardship, Dominion, and the Economics of Glory. We figured that an election year was the perfect time to examine the relationship between God, government, and money. We'll dive deep into what the Bible has to say about what money is, the role it plays in society, and why the principles governing money creation have such a huge and yet underappreciated effect on every aspect of our world. I'll be speaking alongside pastors and respected Christian figures like C.R. Wiley, Thomas Terry, Eric Hirschman, Glenn Sunshine, and many more. Tickets are limited, so use promo code TGFB24 to save 10% today before prices increase. You can also, for a limited time, if you would like to bring your wife with you, we would love for you to do that. We would love husbands to be able to bring their wives. And so we are offering 80% off tickets for wives who want to accompany their husbands. So that means you can get 2 tickets today for $300 by using promo code COUPLE at checkout at tgfb.com/store. Go ahead, run over and do that. We'd love to have husbands and wives together to talk about these very important topics. This is a one-of-a-kind community experience at the intersection of theology, technology, ethics, finance, and economics. We hope to see you there. Okay, back to the show. I was just listening to a different interview with you, and you mentioned that Alice Cooper was one of the people who like he's obviously he's a outspoken Christian, and so he was one of the people who mentioned, who kind of encouraged you on your journey as well.
Not by speaking to me personally, but I saw an interview with him and John. I think it was John Eldridge.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's just confirm because I know Alice from back in the day. Never knew he was a Christian. Never even thought about him that way.
Yeah.
So many people, and there's also a lot of Catholics in my life, so we're all members of the same body. And so it's just been, besides being recertified by Joe, which I think was all his plan. All of it was planned. Pray for Joe, everybody. Everybody pray for Joe. To people who've been listening to my show for over a decade or say, "Oh, we've been praying for you. We've been praying for you for 10 years, brother. We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you." So pray for Joe, which I know a lot of people do. I don't need confirmation again, but it's over and over again, and just every day as I'm in the Word, and as I said, I'm good friends with our pastor, so he's, we're very diligent and we communicate a lot. We talk a lot about it. He and I have lunches or dinners, and we talk about God, the world, and other stuff. Of course, what happens now is a lot of people come to, there's always the emails like, "Hey man, this was a bad translation. It's all a lie. You're worshiping Satan. Eschatology is everywhere."
Yeah.
I get a lot of YouTube videos that say, this is, we're done for.
Yeah.
And I'm a Matthew 24 guy, there will always be wars and rumors of wars, and don't be worried. This is all part of it. There's going to be some earthquakes. It's all good. This is the birthing pains. Just be ready at all times. That's it. Just be ready at all times.
Yeah. I think what you described this a few times is, again, you have these people who are well-meaning, right? Like they're Christians, they're well-meaning, but like they can kind of treat this as a transactional thing. Like, oh, great, we won Adam, and now we're going to like beat him down if he says the wrong thing. And again, it's not that truth doesn't matter. Of course it does. But like, it just can be frustrating as somebody who's, especially, I've worked in vocational ministry, for a good chunk of my life. And again, just the reality of people misspeak especially with somebody who's recently, recently coming to these things. Like, why do you expect that baby in the Lord, or a young Christian is going to be able to articulate with all the verbosity of somebody who's been? It's just not going to happen. And
your apologetics are no good.
Exactly. Yeah. And so,
compared to all the wonderful things and the daily email, someone signs, there's always this little, "God bless, brother. Hey, brother." It's like, oh, okay. I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's much bigger than I ever imagined or ever knew. I think what happened to me, how the Lord worked through me on Joe's show, gave a lot of people courage, because right now, the white Christian male is the enemy. We're dangerous. This is the problem with America. So that scares a lot of people. And so just to come out and say it, I think it made people a lot bolder. At least I hope it did. And I think that that's part of, I keep getting this word like dispense truth, doctrine, and information. And so we know what truth is. Jesus Christ is truth, but doctrine and information is an interesting job. So I just keep doing whatever comes to me. So with the recertification, which restarted podcasting, with my coming to Jesus, I love it. Coming to Jesus, I have a reboot. I'm ready for another 60 years.
There you go. Let's go.
Because you get to a point, you're doing a show. It's like, well, what does this end?
Yeah.
What is this really for? And then you read Solomon, it's like, okay, so what really is this all about? And then you kind of realize, well, I've got to propagate the formula. I've got to spread this out and help people, help the world. Of course, the more you do, the more the enemy comes after you. And so I think we're in a real cleansing moment right now. I think social media, which literally is the epitome of the enemy. If you look, it's all about ego and pride and likes, and
attacking
following
other
other people than Christ. How obvious can it be?
Yeah,
I'm following you. No, I follow Christ, and people are burning out on it, I think, and I hope that this is some kind of a cleansing and stuff gets shaken out. And I can even see young people saying, "This RSS thing, these blogs that you were doing, what's that?" Because we're kind of tired of these platforms and stuff like that. They're tired of their phones. I think that's good. It may have to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
So these are things that I'm always just hammering people on. Like, you got to give that up. There's other things to do. Don't crack your timeline before you've cracked the Bible. Read a chapter. Read a couple of verses. You'll feel good. Pray for a moment. Talk to him. Let the Holy Spirit fill you up. Fill up your bucket so you're ready for the day.
Amen. Let me ask you. So a little bit earlier, you talked about prayer, and again, you've mentioned it several times. What do you remember? I mean, some of these prayers that maybe the initial ones here in the last few years. Is there like one or two prayers that you remember praying where it just shocked you that the Lord answered, or maybe not?
I would say for me, I was praying with people who had sick loved ones, and they were healed.
Wow.
Like from cancer, like from leukemia, from addiction. One of my best friends, although this was a little more recent, was dying. He was drinking himself to death. I mean, he literally looked like guys I knew from the AIDS days. I mean, he would bump his arm and would start bleeding. He was looked like he came out of Auschwitz. Yeah. I went to see him in Spain. We prayed together. He's a lapsed Catholic. We prayed, and he's now been 130 days sober. He's gained 20 pounds. He looks great. Wow. I mean, these things, those things have been just amazing to me. One of the things I realized in 1990, I had a 1-year-old daughter. She was less than 1 year old. MTV finally fired me for the 7th time. This is it. They kept firing because I wouldn't cut my hair, all kinds of dumb things.
Wait a second. MTV fired you because you wouldn't cut your hair?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. MTV, you've gone soft. What in the world?
Yeah. And at that moment, I had, a mortgage payment due, $500 in the bank. It was just like, oh my God. And I couldn't tell my then wife. I was like, what am I going to do? And I was just, for 5 days, like almost a week, I'm just freaking out. What can I do? I'm eating myself up inside. I have this horrible worry. And then the executive producer calls me and said, well, you hired back again 5 times as much as they paid you before. They couldn't find anybody to do it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
From that moment on, I'm like, I'm never worrying about money again. I don't care. It's not important to me. And it really isn't, because I know the universe will take care of me. Yeah. And now I know what it is. And a lot of people have worry about finances. And there's so much scripture that can help you through these types of, why worry about tomorrow? Tomorrow has enough to worry for itself. Can you add 1 cubit in height by worrying? I mean, all these things, but also how to have your financial house in order without it overtaking you. Where your heart is where things grow. I mean, there's just so much in scripture. Because of course, I had to do taxes again, and I still have mental blocks. Like, I don't want to see it, or I don't know what it is. And, I prayed, and the Lord cleansed me. And when I woke up yesterday, I feel great. I'm ready to do this. And I had fun doing it, and I'm loving the numbers, and it's coming to me. And so these types of things, Joe said, I don't know, maybe 50 episodes ago, I don't remember where it was. He said, if only there was a manual for the human brain, like there is for the car. And I'm like, who's going to count Joe?
Asking you shall receive.
And I know where he is in his journey. He's now looking at, they were all on drugs. They were all on psychedelics. Okay, fine. Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. But also just lifting people. It turns out when I pray to lift someone up, that works best. So a friend of mine, his son was very ill, and I was praying for his son. And then I just got kind of a word lift up his dad, because he has a brother, he has a wife, etc. And then everything started to happen. So I also am directed. I'm always surprised by that. No, don't pray for that. Pray, it's this intercession, right? So the Holy Spirit's whispering to me, no, pray for this. Pray to lift him up there. That's something I do a lot. And also, I've learned from Pastor Jimmy, you don't have to be bashful with your prayer. When someone says to me, "Can you pray for me?" on email, I stop right there and I pray for them before I send the email that says I prayed for you. I don't say you're on the list. I'm going to pray. No, I do it right then and there and pray for you. And I'm going to send you the email. I prayed for you. You're good to go.
Yeah. And I love this too. Again, when I watched your interview, I watched the portion of the interview with Joe when you were talking about your faith. And I remember where I was. I was sitting out on my couch, and I just remember watching it and going, that guy is new. It's not about being the expert, again, to our earlier point. It's not about being some expert as far as the information and all the ins and outs of the perfect way to phrase all these things. Just the takeaway was you are new. Again, and you, even now, you have a joy that's tangible. It's just obvious. Yeah. And so it just makes me think, again, in the prayer thing, being a Christian is not that you have everything straightened out. It's that, again, you have a relationship with God through Jesus that's, based in truth, based in who he is. And so all we do is just come to him and ask for his help for ourselves and for other people. And then we continue to grow in our knowledge of him over time. And again, that will, again, the longer that you walk with him, the longer, you start to really kind of piece together the informational and the logical side of things. But you have what many people don't have, which is just I trust in Jesus. I walk with him and I ask for his help and he answers me. I'll never forget the first answer to prayer that I experienced. I was probably 5 or 6 years old. My mom was running around our house trying to find keys. I did, grew up in a Christian family. So my mom was trying to find her keys and she just said to me, she's like, Jordan, get up and try to help me look for the keys. So I just remember I sat at the dining room table. I put my head down and I said, Lord, will you help me find the keys? And again, not audible voice, but God was just like, go look in the fridge. I get up, walk to the fridge, I open the door, and the keys are right there in the fridge.
Great story. And I'm all with you. You can do this. You can literally, I have also literally prayed to find something. Lord, please help me find my glasses or whatever it is. And it works. Yeah. It really, that's a great story. Yeah. Especially at a young age. Wow. What a confirmation there. That's great. Yeah. And it's okay. It can be that menial stuff. It's okay. That's what's so great about it.
And that's the thing is like, it's just the conclusion I've come to in a lot of ways is like the Lord, he brings these different roadblocks, like he brings them in front of us, whether they're, big things or small things, whatever. He brings us these problems so that we'll come to him and so that he can give us the joy and the experience of seeing him help us. And so again, and then the convicting thing. So I've got young kids and the convicting thing is, you walk around and there's days where you're just like, oh my gosh, you totally forget. You're looking for something or you have this problem and it'll be one of my kids will go, Dad, have you prayed yet? And I'm like,
nice.
Oh man. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, child. Exactly. I need that. And then you pray and then he answers, And so I think that's a big part of this is even as a Christian, it's easy to despise weakness. And God just basically, he gives us weakness so that he can give us the gift of seeing him provide for our needs. And so, okay, so this is maybe a strange place to transition in some ways, but at the same time, as you're talking about fear and you're talking about how often fear is connected to money, I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people, whether they're Christians or not, there's so much fear governing a lot of what's going on, a lot of the discourse that's going on right now, because people are afraid of being canceled. And a big part of the reason why they're afraid to be canceled is because of the economic consequences. Yeah, the monetary consequences. And, and again, if you have a platform of any type, you can get canceled and demonetized and, you've got bills to pay and kids to provide for, and that can just go out the window if you say the quote unquote wrong thing, which many times is the right thing. So we can get into some of the specifics of that later, but just when I think about Bitcoin, this is one of the reasons why I have these conversations with pastors. I have these conversations with, different church leaders and nonprofit organizations about Bitcoin as, money that can enable you to be not cancel proof, but that is, it's created to operate outside of the existing systems that can, make you less susceptible to cancellation. I'm just going to ask you, within the No Agenda sponsorship, do you have people who sponsor you in Bitcoin, or do you have people who, I would imagine you have Bitcoiners who are sponsoring you. Maybe you could kind of speak to how did you find Bitcoin and kind of what are your thoughts? Is that one of the things about Bitcoin that you appreciate? Feel free to kind of take that question where you want to.
Adam's Bitcoin journey started back with the inception of Bitcoin.
Yep.
And people in our audience were emailing me saying, dude, Bitcoin is the real deal. It's the real deal. This is the real deal. And Dvorak and I would be on the show and we'd be like, I can't pay my rent with it. This is Beanie Babies. This is bull crap. People were sending me Bitcoin, sending me Bitcoin. And we mocked it and we laughed at it for years. And then in 2015, it's like, wow, it's at $900. Let me see if I have that Bitcoin. Yeah. I had like the OG wallet on the Mac. We have to download the whole chain first.
Yeah.
And I said, I got 65 Bitcoin. I'm going to sell them all, which I did. I had $64,000. I'm like, I'm a genius. And it went to 10,000 like 3 months later.
Yeah.
And even worse, at the time I was into day trading. So I day traded with the $64,000. I mean, the $64,000 question of idiocy.
Yeah.
So Dvorak really hates Bitcoin because of this story, because he feels that we screwed up. So he's so anti-Bitcoin, it's not even funny.
No.
Which I respect. We're 50-50. We each have a veto on anything.
Exactly.
So accepting Bitcoin, no, I don't want it even to touch our organization. I don't want to have any problems with taxation, et cetera, et cetera. So as I said, as a part of Podcasting 2.0, we built this value for value into the apps with the Lightning Network. So I was reintroduced to Bitcoin through the Lightning Network, and I got a Raspberry Pi. I'm like, this is great. This is programmable money. We can do all kinds of cool stuff with this, which of course is now implemented in 15 apps. And my wife was with me, Tina, in 2015. We were just together at that point. So she knows the whole 65 Bitcoin story. and it went down below 4,000. I said, I really believe in this thing. And she says, I'm with you. And so we started investing our money in Bitcoin. So half of our money is in Gitmo Nation fiat bullcrap with our buddy Andrew Horowitz. Our savings. She's very, very prudent. She came with 401ks. I married her for the money, is what I always say. But I've always had cash flow. So so then we also bought a house together before we were even married. So we're pretty diversified, and we're a DCA, dollar cost averaging every day. Now we did buy a nice little chunk at 4,000. I think we had $10,000. So that's been a 10x literally. Or today, even more. So, wow. But just every day, little bit. And so it's been for us a great savings technology. And we believe in it. We believe in the long term. We believe in the whole concept. As we've come to Christ on our faith journey, it seems more and more apparent that this is truly something given to us by God, created. Who knows exactly how that all went down, but I can read the white paper. I can see the protocol. I run 3 nodes myself. I understand how it works. This is, it's obviously just like fiat money. It's a belief system. Everybody has to believe in the chain. We all have to believe in the consensus. And that's why it works. So for me, it was very obvious that this is part of a God-given system, because of course, we're not really about money. For the love of money is the root of all evil, but having control of your finances and it's sovereign. It's truly the only property that we actually really, really, really own. And, and we both we have 12 words memorized for our emergency Bitcoin here or there. Oh yeah. By the way, who knows, when we go to heaven, it might be handy. Like, hey, I remember my 12 words. Is this? So really the Lightning Network has been, as such a huge part of the value for value ecosystem. And even we receive most of our donations in Bitcoin for the value for value show. The value for the Podcasting 2.0, and for the index, we just provide liquidity to people at, almost no fees. But we get these literally, if you see our wallet, so we get, usually our typical payment is 1 sat at a time, but it's not so much about the money, but it's more about when you log into the node and you just see every minute one of these coming by, but it's podcasters see that, app developers see that. This is all, everyone gets a piece of this action. So that's 3 1 sat payments. It's not about the 1 sat.
No,
but
it's about
after 3 years, and everyone can see it, we have almost 2 Bitcoin on our node.
Yes, it's unbelievable.
Wow. And we've already paid the taxes over it when it came in, and so it's doubled in value. I mean, how can this not be something from Father? This is fantastic. The Beef Initiative, as I mentioned earlier, beefinitiative.com, which is really just about connecting ranchers with, and this is very current, you're going to see the prices of beef skyrocket. The lowest stock right now since the 70s. This consolidation, big food, big ag, they want to get rid of it. They want you to be eating pork. From China. They don't want you to eat American beef. So Slim came out and he said, look, I need to teach people how to interact with ranchers. I need to teach ranchers how to interact with people, because they're just commodity cowboys at this point. They just sell to Cargill or JB's and they don't care anymore. And he found that Bitcoiners were the people who were willing to learn. So at this point, we use K&C cattle in Austin. So the Bitcoin that I receive from my other podcasts outside of No Agenda, and just Bitcoin that I try to transact with people as much as possible, literally turn that around and I spend it in Bitcoin on Lightning on K&C cattle beef. So we're building this ecosystem where we're already using this in real life, in real time for one of the most basic things there is, which is food.
Food.
So if it's only just for practice, we have to be doing these things because it's very hard to explain to people what inflation really means. It's hard to explain what devaluation of the currency means. When people start saying, hey, I need a second job because everything's so expensive, I say, well, this is kind of the outcome of it. And at least get involved. And so the first Pastor Jimmy, I really orange pilled him, and I helped him set up his podcast, Living Up in a Down World, which he does with his wife Annette. And they're value for value, and they take boosts and boostograms and streaming SAP payments. And I've talked with him a lot about this. And what do you think? He said, well, first of all, value for value, time, talent, and treasure. That's a God thing. He says, I think he also was like, this Bitcoin, it could very well be a God thing. Why not? I mean, it's here. It must have been planned out.
And I think you would agree with this based on our conversation. One of the things I think about is ultimately that your time, talents, and treasure, everything that you have is from God. And so, every good and perfect gift is from above. And so if Bitcoin is a good gift, then humans can't ultimately take credit for it. And it very much is that. And so the other thing that, again, when I talk to people, I talk to church leaders and Christians all the time about Bitcoin. Again, I'm not trying to make some claim of, it's the greatest thing ever, forget everything else, just, focus on this thing. But in terms of, I've spoken with numerous nonprofit organizations that are doing work globally, Christian organizations that are doing work all over the world. They're sending missionaries. And there's countries that, because of different geopolitical conflicts, don't have access to the SWIFT system. They don't have access to the US dollar system. And so they have missionaries who they're trying to support. And so they can't use, this system in order to do so. They can use Bitcoin. And so from that standpoint, even if you just looked at it for a way that you could fund international humanitarian and Christian missionary efforts, Christians ought to really care about these things. But then even further, you see something like, Canadian trucker protests, and these guys all get cut off. It ended up being, recently, shout out to BJ Dichter, who's the organizer for the protests, a bunch of the protests. They just got found innocent, and they, was ruled, everything that happened was ruled to be unconstitutional, illegal, the whole thing. But that's 2 or 3 years ago now. And so in the meantime, Bitcoin was the only thing that was able to help them, pay their bills and have at least some money in the meantime. And so I just think having that conversation with Christians and churches about, again, just having a percentage of your money in Bitcoin to be able to do things like pay staff, or in the event that you do get debanked, because again, Christians, there's many things that Christians believe that are outside of the Overton window of acceptable thought. And so there's things that have been normal for, thousands of years here in this moment, or just you sound insane if you believe them. And so I think that just having those conversations and helping people, to your point, it's very difficult because it's such a departure from the world that people have gotten used to. But I think it's a valuable conversation to continue to have with people. And again, it's just like you. I'm sure that the first time you heard about Jesus, you didn't become a Christian. It took a number of touches in conversations and things. And so, again, I'm not trying to equate their importance at all, but the same dynamic exists. You have to encounter Bitcoin and think about it a number of different times and potentially from a number of different ways in order for it to be something that you're willing to consider investing, money in or time to try to understand it.
There's a couple of responses to that. One, there's this concept I call the TJs. The Tell Joes. So first time I was on Rogan, people are like, tell Joe about Bitcoin. Tell Joe he's got to get this guy. Tell Joe he's got to get that. Tell Joe. Now, after my testimony, be like, tell Joe he's got to come to Jesus. Tell Joe he needs to have this pastor on. Tell Joe. Yeah. Here's the part that I really like about Bitcoin, and I take it to, besides the sovereignty and unbankability, just it's yours, it's real ownership of property. If I have a mission in life, I'd like to make peace profitable again. And I believe Bitcoin enables that. And there are many people in my life who are not, I'm politically homeless, but I've never belonged to a party. But I understand young people have socialist thinking, borderline Marxist, communist. The beauty is Bitcoin works for the system you want. When I hear we want to go back to kind of like the Native Americans, and and someone does this and you do that, and it's more of a collective. I say, well, Bitcoin enables that. Because the Native Americans, who like my Native American friends like to be called American Indians. Strange, but okay. Yeah. My black friends want to be called friends.
Yeah.
part of some magical black community.
Yeah.
It's like, well, there's always been ledgers. Oh, really? That's interesting. So there wasn't really money, but they had ledgers. Yeah, they had ledgers of account between tribes. Oh, that's interesting. So what if there were this ledger that no one could screw with, that was actually that literally worked and everyone agreed and it's by consensus? And you can have, like we do in Value for Value with podcasting, where you can have a split. So someone sends you a boost of 10,000 sats and the podcaster in the feed, open public contract, basically has these splits, would say 40% to the co-host, 40% to the co-host, 5% to the producer, 5% to mom who lent me the money for the gear. You could have the same. I buy a coffee and part of it goes to the owner of the building. Part of it goes to the barista who made it. You can have this same collective without it being this evil corporate structure that you all hate because the workers should own it. No, the workers shouldn't own it. But you can do these types of things with Bitcoin. And once you can't print money, there's no reason to go to war over this stuff, which is where I come back to, let's make peace profitable again. And peace can be profitable using a Bitcoin standard. Now, do I think we'll witness that? Maybe not, Jordan, but maybe our kids will, or at least to some degree. It won't take much. I mean, there's farmers markets that have used wooden coins for years and are now actually, a lot of them are transitioning to Bitcoin. And, the marketing has been horrible, or the anti-marketing, I should say. The anti-marketing is, that's just a bunch of guys who want to own Lambos. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
They do exist.
But the path to convincing someone to use and adopt and love Bitcoin is not dissimilar to that of Jesus. It's the same hurdles, the same hurdles. There's lots of documentation. There's lots of experiences you can have. So it kind of goes hand in hand, but it really, Jesus said, whose face is on the money? Whose face is on the money? It's his money. That's his money. Pay the taxes, whatever. Mm-hmm. But if it's something that belongs to everybody, that's a whole different story. And we have Satoshi and the branding, but it's not, it really isn't. It's just numbers. So I ask God often, like, is this good? Is this stuff good? I mean, let me know. It's like, just put me on the center line, Jesus. If I'm off base, yank the chain if I'm wrong about this. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going down this path.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, and that, again, that's the thing is I think something as simple as food became the thing that, resulted in sin entering the world and causing all kinds of problems, and it's because it's not really the thing itself. It's all about how do we interact with these things and what emphasis and what level of importance do we attribute to these things? And, what do we believe that these different gifts that God has put in our lives can do for us? Are we attributing them the level of importance and the level of utility that are we doing with them the things that God wants us to do, or are we, giving them disproportionate time, attention, whatever they are? And whenever you do that, you're going to cause yourself problems. The goal is finding, is to have wisdom to be able to skillfully navigate the world in ways that you're not just insane, radical and in unhealthy ways. There's plenty of healthy ways that we're designed to be radical. We should be radically loving. Whether we tell people, whether we shove people out of the road, out of oncoming traffic, a shove can be loving. The majority of the time, it's going to be communicating things in kind ways, but that still might be obviously good. They might be obviously loving. There's other things that just we're going to have to say things. Love has this preservative effect, and so God calls us to be salt and light. And so sometimes our love is saying the true thing that is unfavorable, and it's going to have that feeling of maybe salt in the wound. It's going to burn, but it's a truthful thing that we need to hear for, the sake of our society or our family or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's something, again, we don't want to be afraid for the future, but I do think one of the beneficial effects of Bitcoin is that it can help people to be denominating and saving in something that can't just be devalued, in something that they can't be cut off from the way that the existing system has. So I think
Scripture even tells us that money can be stolen, money can lose value, money can be devalued. I'm not sure exactly where, but I know I've read it. And so these are just truths. This is just truth. And so here's something that works in the opposite direction. Actually, I find that Bitcoin's origins, my experiences, it has all been loving and giving. People are always sharing their Bitcoin. Like, hey, it is. And I see value for value. It's the same thing. Like, and people don't even really calculate to fiat anymore. They're just like, this is and we have the Striper boost. So it's 77,777 sats. Boom, that's your Striper boost.
Yeah.
We have all numerology comes into play all the time. And people are just like, oh, I feel like giving you 10,000 sats just for that great moment in the podcast. They're not even thinking about, how much is that? What is that? $4? What I don't know. Who cares what that is?
It's small enough where they just, we just want to support, this thing that we're listening to. It's for Adam.
It's really a loving, I always say boosting is loving, it literally is a loving gesture. And so when you see these types of technologies or methodologies that are the inverse of what the real world is, I like to pay attention, like, oh, that's really interesting that people do that, So I really pray that this is the way. I mean, I can't find any evidence to the contrary. I've heard nothing to the contrary. It's just all good. Obviously, the enemy is fighting it tooth and nail. I mean, there's just no doubt about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I think it's so easy to be. Again, you mentioned some of the people in your replies and comments and stuff who are like, the doom and gloom, like the end is near, like that whole thing. Everyone, there's a snake, there's danger under every little thing. And it's like, it's not even that there's not danger out there, but it is, like this is not God's first rodeo. We're not out here, running around terrified of what's going to happen. Like this is, I think again, to the point about insofar as Bitcoin is a tool for the, helping advance the gospel to places that, they're not able to get to otherwise. I think, again, just the reality of the thought that God is more committed to making his name and his glory known in the world than we are. And so he is going to create tools and avenues and ways for that to happen in all kinds of surprising things that both frustrate the plans of the wicked and that advance, his causes. And so I think it's in 1 Corinthians, Paul is talking to the Corinthians, the church that's most like churches in the United States. They didn't have money issues the way that some of the Galatians did and some of these other guys did. And so he says to them, there weren't many wise among you. There weren't many, smart, wealthy. He just basically goes through this whole list. And he says, God uses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise and the things that are not to bring to nothing the things that are. And so, again, this is not the primary intention of this. He's talking about a number of different things, but I just can't help but when I think about Bitcoin, I'm like, what is more foolish? What is more foolish than magic internet money that is like proving and demonstrating how ridiculous the farce of fiat currency is? All of the biggest nations on earth, they have this, paper money that they're creating ad absurdum.
That we create wars over. We fight wars over it.
We're literally funding endless wars and funding all kinds of awful things all over the world. And how is God, in part, bringing that system to an end with magic internet money? That this guy had the idea.
With a bunch of nerds. Bring some nerds into the picture with magic internet money. Yeah. Of course he would do that.
Of course he would do that. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what I just think. I just enjoy it from that standpoint. Again, it could disappear tomorrow, and again, life would be hard. But again, the Lord knows. Like at the end of the day, the mistake that we want to avoid with Bitcoin, the same way that you want to avoid with everything, is putting your trust in it to where if it gets taken away, then all of a sudden you're despondent and stuff. And so I think that it's always been a temptation. That always will be a temptation. And again, the thing that what do we do? How do we be faithful? Is just like be grateful for these tools, leverage them, use them. But ultimately still, we go through the day relying on God and asking for his help and for wisdom. Well, Adam, I am so grateful for, again, your time and just for, just again, our conversation, the things that we talked about. And hopefully this won't be the last time.
And I really appreciate what you're doing. I love because you do podcasts, you also have separate videos, I think, that you do. And I love seeing it. And although they're coming from a different angle, I love the Noster brothers. Yeah. It's not, we have some healthy competition between the RSS delivery and the Noster. But ultimately, we're all kind of doing the same thing, and we're trying to create a better world. I think for our children, for your kids, I want them to have a much better future and have some real ownership in the world. And so I really appreciate what you do. And it was nice to do this, man. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah. And again, hopefully this won't be the last. I do know, I will say, I believe you're recording with John on the Thank God for Noster podcast as well. Is that next week?
Yes, I am. And which I'm doing because the Holy Spirit told me, like, don't be adversarial. Go talk to the man. Like, yes, okay, I shall do that. That's right.
John is honestly one of the best people I've ever met in my life. Like, he is such a great guy. And again, I don't know if he told you this, like his dad listened to No Agenda for us forever. And so he's
he didn't. I didn't know
he's
that.
looking forward to listening to that too. So.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Well, cool. Well, Adam, again, we'll talk soon, hopefully. And again, appreciate your time.
Likewise, brother. God bless.
Our mission at TGFB is to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. We do this through podcasts, books, consulting services, and live events. We love giving away as much of our resources as possible, but we do have real overhead costs. And there are a number of easy ways that you can help us keep the lights on to continue our mission. First, if you're a Bitcoiner, you can listen to the podcast on the Fountain app and stream us sats in real time as you listen to the podcast. Every contribution makes a difference, no matter how small. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/TGFB to receive a number of special benefits available only to our Patreon supporters. If you find these conversations valuable, you can also help spread the word by sharing this episode, subscribing on YouTube, and leaving reviews on Apple and Spotify. Leaving us good reviews goes a long way toward ensuring that the algorithmic powers that be look favorably on our humble endeavors. And finally, engage with us on social media. Join the conversation so that we can build a strong community united around faith, freedom, and sound money. We mentioned the TGFB 24 conference on July 24th and 25th in Nashville. You can go grab your tickets at tgfb.com/store. And finally, go check out julianabarbati.com if you have questions about how to start or better your own podcast. We're grateful for your support, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast.